Om Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Param Vishwaro Guratmeti Motiveda Vibhagine Yom Abda Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Sarvavedanta Sedanta Gocharam Tamagocharam Govindam Paramanantam Satguru Pranatosh Maham Om Om Shanti 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 Om Namaste. Welcome everyone to our Panchadasi class. We begin today from the verse number 9. The self is bliss. So it begins with Vidyaranya saying that others are loved for the sake of the self, but the self is loved for none other. Therefore, the love for the self is the highest. So as we know, and I think we have addressed a little bit, we have unfolded a little bit or commented a little bit on this verse. So every love we have is the love for the self, and we love the self because the self gives us satisfaction. We don't love anything unless it is a source of happiness. This is common sense. We never love something that produces pain and suffering and sorrow. We only love things that produce happiness, joy, and contentment. And guess what? We love the self more than anything. Actually, it's the only unconditional love we have is the love for the self. Yeah? Of course, most people think that I love myself. They think like I love my body, but they are unconsciously, they are loving themselves because they understand that the self is the most precious thing. Everybody loves one's existence, one's consciousness. We have this incredible love, and this love, this unconditional love we have for our existence is already in itself an indication that this self that we love so dearly, it must be the only true source of happiness, because we only love what brings us joy and happiness, and we love the self the most. It's just a question of understanding. When we say, I love myself, is to understand that everybody loves the self, and the self is not the physical body as most people believe. Oh, I love myself. Yes, I love my body. Therefore, I spend some time looking at the mirror so that I can fix myself and make myself beautiful, because I believe that myself is the body. So now deep inside, we love the self because we only love that which gives us joy and happiness. And that is a clear indication that my nature, the nature of this self that I take to be the body, but the nature of this real self, it must be limitlessness. It must be joy and happiness and bliss, because that is the real source of happiness. And that's why we love the self. And when we think that we love the other, we are just loving the self. And I love the self, the non-dual self, because I'm just trying to please this non-dual love by loving the other. Of course, most people are not aware of that fact, and they believe that they really love the other unconditionally, which is clearly not the case. Every love to another jiva is conditional. So we love the other for as long as the other behaves. The other just gives back, or it's something like, I love you for as long as you love me, and you should love me a little bit more than I love you. Otherwise, otherwise I'm not going to be happy with you. No? But when we look at ourselves and the love we have to ourselves, it is close to be unconditional. It's not really totally unconditional love, meaning to say a lot of the time we hate ourselves because we are not clearly understanding what the self is. We take the self to be the body and the mind, and then sometimes we have trouble with ourselves. We don't really appreciate ourselves. We have a bad or low self-image or self-esteem. We feel, oh my God, I'm so inadequate, I'm a limit, you know I'm so and so, because again, I'm mistaking the self to be the body-mind complex. But for those of us understanding the self is the existence, and it is our conscious existence, and we really love it. This love for this conscious existence is built in every creature, even the other jivas. We have this love for the self, and and from there on we can understand that we have this hardwired love for the self because it is the real true source of bliss, happiness, because we only love that which gives us happiness and bliss, right? Simple logic. The most common word we use is I. This I refers to the self. Yeah? It's very, very interesting because we say this word so many, many times. And a lot of the time, most of the time, is referring to the body mind, because we say that in the context of interacting with other bodies and things and place and things and circumstance. So in interacting with the field, we say I, and then Cloud says I, and then Mark says I. And it's interesting that we say the same I. There is only one I. This I is the self, and this is the common ground. It's the base. We can only communicate because there is only one self. So there is a logic here that presents the fact that in order for us to connect and communicate, we need a common ground. For example, when we try to relate to other people, we need to see what we can talk to that people. I mean, of course, in common we have what? I have my existence, the other has the same existence, the same consciousness, but we want to communicate, so we need to see what is common, what are the common values, the common interest between me and the other. For example, when I talk to my father-in-law, I always talk about soccer, because he has that appreciation, love for soccer, and I have, or used to have, and to please him, to have something to say to him rather than how is the weather there and the weather here so and so. So I talked to him about soccer. So we have a common ground. Huh? So we always need a common denominator in order to relate to the other. So this fundamental common denominator is the I, is our existence, is our conscious existence that is common to the other. So based on that, we can communicate with others. If we don't have a common ground, it's impossible. There is only one I. And when I meet another person, I would have to learn who he was if there was not one single self, one single I, before I could even begin communication. I was unique. If every I was unique, there will be no way to communicate. If every I was unique, there would be no way to communicate. But I can communicate with a complete stranger because we have the same I. I'm sorry, I think I misread it. Communication depends on something common, the common ground that I was mentioning. It is a connection to the other. If every I was unique, if every I was an individual, different I. So when I say I am an I. When Claudio says I, he's another I. If every I was unique, meaning to say different, huh? There will be no way to communicate. But this I, this self, this existence can communicate with a complete stranger because both share the same principle, the same I, the same self, the same existence. So when we get in contact with the other, say, hey, hi, so how are you existing today? So, oh, yes, I am existing all right. It's all good here. Yeah? So we have this existence, this I in common. If it was not common to all this existence, we would not have any means to communicate. So we have this I, and we know that the facts relate to the bodies. They are different from one to another. Therefore, we can say, oh, yes, my emotions today, oh, they feel so and so. And then the others say, okay, no, I'm feeling great today. So this is all part of the body mind construct in its qualities, properties, and attributes, and so on. Do not in any way impinge on the ability of the self to speak to itself in another body. All these differences do not stop, do not prevent on obstruct us because we have this common existence. In any case, the self can only be bliss ananda because I am always an object of my own love. So the self can only be a source of ananda, of bliss, because I am always an object of my own love. So my love is always direct to myself. So therefore, this self must be the true source of ananda. I work overtime to please myself. We do everything. We run out of things. We accomplishing all for the sake of pleasing this self, this I. I work overtime to please myself because I love myself, and I know that you do too. So everybody loves the self and the most, and the true love is the love to the self. That's what it means. What is a source of love is a source of happiness. If everybody loves oneself, with with some exceptions, because unconsciously we all love oneself, the one self. Huh? But on a different level, once it is identification with the body and with the mind, is very relevant. And then we may not love ourselves because we experience those notions of incompletion and inadequacy, insufficiency and smallness and so on. So in those moments, we may not really love ourselves because we experience a certain degree of limitation. Yeah? But generally speaking, this love everybody has fundamentally unconditioned, in spite of the limitations of the body-mind construct. This love is unconditioned, and because it is the very source of our happiness. When something stops being a source of happiness, we no longer love that object. That I love myself shows that I am a source of happiness. My love to myself is unconditional, whereas my love to others is always conditional. When the circumstances that relate you to me change, our love for each other may change as well. Conditional love is unreal because it does not last. Or in other words, it's conditional love. We all know what conditional love, and we all have those moments of unconditional love. Conditional love is a bargain, so It's just a partnership. It's like, okay, let's work together, let's live together, let's, support one another together, and so on. And let's find a good and fair exchange between us, the two. When the circumstance, conditional love is unreal because it does not last. It's always changing, It's going up and down, and sometimes, unfortunately, it turns into hate. It goes into hate and then comes back, and then again, it feels like love. But the self-love, the love for the self is unconditioned. It's real, meaning to say that it's always there, okay? Therefore, it is real and it's not separate from consciousness. A wise person's love includes everyone because he sees everyone as their non-dual self, aware, existent, and full. Consciousness, existence, and fullness is the nature of the self. And a wise person, the person that holds at all times this spiritual wisdom in one's intellect, in one's mind, it sees and loves everything in creation as the only self there is. And there is this love, this appreciation direct to everything as the only self manifest by the Lord Ishwara. Whereas the self-ignorant person's love only goes to objects that conform to his or her likes and dislikes, as we know. If you do want, if you do what I want, I will love you. If you don't, I won't love you. That's very common. That is most of our experience. How are you doing? So far, so good. We don't have David here to ask him to present his questions. Karen. I call Karen like that to find out if she's having breakfast or if she's with us. Now I want to ask her because David said that he's having some health issues. So and I know that they speak daily. They speak very often to one another. Maybe she knows something about him.
He has heart arrhythmia, like rapid heart rate, atrial fibrillation.
I see.
Atrial fib, yeah. So they're regulated with medication.
Oh, that's something that he has, and he's always takes some medication for that.
Yes, he's had it several years. But stress seems to aggravate it. So,
understood.
And he's thinking of moving. So.
Oh yes, he has been very agitated with this moving out. Yeah. Thank you, Ruth. So the next verse, the verse number 10, it says, is scripture established by reasoning that the individual self and the impersonal self are of the nature of existence, consciousness, and bliss, limitlessness. And the Upanishads teach that the individual and the limitless self, that the individual self and the limitless self are one and the same, are one, let's say are one, not the same, because they are not really the same, but they are one. Yeah. So it begins saying that scripture established by logic, by reasoning. Yeah. This is very interesting. And a lot of people in the spiritual world has a hard time appreciating Vedanta because they don't have enough appreciation for knowledge, for logic, yeah? For reasoning, following, analyzing, reasoning. A lot of people say, "Oh no, this is mental." Okay, the truth can only be felt. The truth can never be known. So that is a very common common notion in the spiritual world. So Vedanta makes it very, very clear. A scripture established by reasoning, by logic, by analysis, and this reasoning, this logic, this analysis is all based on our experience, day to day, moment to moment experience of life, which were not ever properly examined. So when we examine our experience in the light of these teachings of Vedanta, and then we have the knowledge, the reasons, the logic to support those final statements that says that the individual self and the limitless self are one. So how can we know something like that, so radical? Yeah, the small individual, the parts, is the totality, the individual self and the totality of Brahman, is one and the same. So how can we reconcile such an incredible apparent paradox? The only way we can do that is by examining the logic of our experience in the light of the teachings of the Upanishads. That's the only way. And it says that the individual self and the impersonal self. Impersonal self is another way of saying the universal self or non-dual self or the true self. Here in this verse, Vidyaranya presents this impersonal self, which is nice. Sometimes it's good we change words, because words is what somehow is going to make things click for us here and there until we have this complete picture. The impersonal self is the self which is not a jiva, which is not a person, okay? The universal, non-dual self. And the nature are of the nature of existence, consciousness, and limitlessness. So far, we have established not by experience, but by analysis, by reasoning, based on the experience of our day-to-day experience, that the self is Chit, Sat, and Ananda. It is consciousness, existence, and limitlessness. So we have established that so far, yeah, by logic based on our day-to-day experience, that the nature of the self is consciousness, which is consciousness, existence, and limitlessness. Scripture is the revelation of the unexamined logic of experience. Discrete experience is seemingly impersonal, but experience itself is impersonal. So this is another very nice statement. When we say that this is my experience, I have had this experience just a few minutes ago. So this is a discrete experience, I own this experience, I claim this experience to be my experience. So who and what is claiming the experience to be my experience? Is the individual self under the spell of the ego, Maya, Vidya. It says, I am the individual and my experience is unique. Nobody has ever had this experience of love as I do. Sometimes when people fall in love, they say, oh, this is the biggest love of the universe. Nobody has had this amazing experience of love, So the individual, it's somehow the ego. It claims and owns the experience, and then we have what we call a personal experience. But what it says here is that the nature of every experience is impersonal. Experience is just consciousness shining or reflecting in a human intellect and getting contact with an object of experience. And then experience happens. And every other jiva is having an experience every moment. Every cockroach or rat or anything, is having an experience again and again because it's again contacting an object of experience. But nobody says, oh, this is my experience, except the human jivas, of course. Yeah? The ego, yeah? Chitabasa. Discrete experience are seemingly personal, but experience in truth is impersonal. If what is revealed is not the experience of everyone in this fact, and this fact is not known, so it means to say, if what is revealed by Vedanta, by 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 paying attention to our experience, examining carefully our very experience, if this revelation, Vedantic revelation, is not the same experience of everyone, is meaning to say, if you follow the logic of Vedanta, you're going to understand that these statements of Vedanta are equally valid for all beings, all jivas, okay? Because experience is impersonal. There is only one experience, which is consciousness, reflecting in a subtle body and contacting an object of experience. And then the moment that we examine this phenomenon in the light of Vedanta, and then we see that, oh my God, my experience are not that unique, they are not that private, everybody has the same experience. Basically, every human being experiences the same emotions and sensations and so on. So if these revelations is not experienced by everyone, and this fact is not known to people, then Vedanta is useless and liberation is only a matter of chance. So Vedanta is the only means to self-knowledge and liberation. And that is so because this analysis, this reasoning presented by the Lord Ishvara is valid to everyone. Therefore, there is no question of chance. This self-knowledge and liberation is only possible by our own efforts to re-examine our experience, following the logic as presented by the Upanishads, until we clearly see what the Upanishads is telling us, seeing what? Oh, that I am consciousness, I am existence, and I don't change. No, I don't really do anything, but it appears as if I'm doing, no? And I'm complete, I'm non-dual, I am limitless, because there is only this substratum, this conscious existence principle, my fundamental true nature, as the nature, fundamental nature of everything and everyone. So all of that is possible by the means of reasoning, by logic, analyzing, following the logic, of course, as presented by Vedanta. There is no question of chance. But assuming that an individual is qualified to understand, his or her mind is properly prepared, qualified, inquiry will set anyone free, because ignorance is the same, it's impersonal, although it may show on different shapes and colors. So, but basically, ignorance of the nature of the self is is common to all. We have ignorance about several other fields of knowledge. I don't know anything about astrology, for example, and then Cloud may know everything about astrology, for example, but this ignorance may be different from one to another. But the ignorance in respect to the true nature of this I, of this self, is common to all Jews. Yeah? So everybody is born out of ignorance. It lives within ignorance. And most of us die in ignorance just to come back to carry on another cycle in the samsara chakra. So this ignorance is common to all. Therefore, this knowledge is the only remedy to all beings, provided they are qualified, they are prepared. Because ignorance is impersonal. Logical analysis results in impersonal knowledge, and there is only one eternal impersonal individual. So inquiry, yeah, this analysis, this logic, this contemplation will set anyone free, because ignorance is impersonal, okay? It's one size fits all. It's one medicine, one remedy that serves to all. No, because the ignorance is the only disease, the only illness is ignorance in respect to our true nature. And then it's a common disease. And everyone needs just one single remedy. And this remedy comes in the form of logic based on the analysis of our very experience of life. Therefore, this logical analysis results in impersonal knowledge, impersonal, meaning to say, like, when we have this self-knowledge, it's like, oh, my self-knowledge. No, the ignorance was impersonal. It was imposed by Maya. You know, it's impersonal, universal, cosmic ignorance imposed by Maya. And then Lord Ishvara, somehow, due to its compassion, reveals this knowledge, and then here and there, on some individuals, this ignorance is uplifted. No? And then we have knowledge. Does the knowledge belong to the individual? No, of course not. The knowledge is the nature of Ishvara, pure sattva, that, you know, that release the jiva from samsara, and then the individual, he does not feel like, oh, now, my God, I am this self-realized, this enlightened person, I have self-knowledge, I have moksha. No. The individual who says that did not really understand what knowledge is. Knowledge is impersonal as well. Logical analysis results in impersonal self-knowledge, and there is only one eternal impersonal individual. There is only one eternal impersonal individual is also an interesting passage here. It brings us to the concept of the eternal jiva. There is only one jiva, one principle, one universal, eternal jiva, you know, which is an object with three bodies, with a subtle body containing enough sattva to produce this self-reflection, this self-consciousness, and without which self-knowledge is impossible. So this eternal jiva is there. It is impersonal, but it becomes personal when it is experienced and seen from the body-mind complex of the individual. But fundamentally, there is only one impersonal ignorance, one impersonal knowledge, and there is one impersonal jiva going through this process of total ignorance, a little bit less ignorance, some knowledge, and more knowledge and little ignorance, until self-knowledge is gained, obtained, and retained. Yes, Lynn?
Do you mean to say that universal individual is just among the self-aware, or does that extend to the animals and the plants and so forth?
Can you repeat again, please?
Does that universal individual encompass other jivas, plants and animals? Or is it just, are you just referring to the self-aware?
Well, we could, if we just open up, you know, if we should just, how you say in English, when we just we open it, and then all jivas could be included into that. There is only one eternal jiva, which is impersonal. It's just an object with three bodies, and then having a subtle body in which consciousness shines to produce sentience. But the sentience experienced by the insects, for example, or by any other, creature on the vegetal or animal realm, it's not as sophisticated, so that knowledge can be gained consciously. You understand? So with eternal jiva can include all jivas, all living beings. Living beings. A jiva is a creature that has a sentience that allows it to respond to its environment. But the human jiva, having a more complex, a more sophisticated intellect or subtle body, let's say, it has this discriminating, discerning, determining faculty, which allows for knowledge, and ultimately it loses interest in knowing, its environments, and becomes interested in knowing one's true nature. You understand? So we can include all beings as well as the eternal jiva. There is only one impersonal knowledge. There is only one eternal impersonal jiva, individual. If the nature of the limitless self is awareness, existence, and limitlessness, then the individual self and the universal self are one, because there are no two limitlessness. So when we say this word limitless or limitlessness is very important to be understood, because when we say that the nature of the self is consciousness, existence, and limitlessness. So when we say limitlessness is only possible to conceive within the understanding that there is nothing other than one self, meaning to say there is only one non-dual self-existing principle, okay? Which is not really a principle, but there is only one self, one consciousness, one existence of the nature of non-dual, one without a second. The moment that there is something other than one, and then the very other is going to impose a limit to the existing factor, okay? So when we say that limitlessness is the nature of Brahman, meaning to say that there is only Brahman, there is only consciousness. If there is only consciousness, if the nature of Brahman is limitlessness, means to say it's one without a second, where are we going to put this jiva? Right? Where are we going to locate this jiva if there is only consciousness, existence? This is what it means, limitlessness. It's non-dual. There is only this consciousness, and we experience this conscious existence all the time. There is only one consciousness. And then how can I exclude myself if the nature of the self is limitlessness? Limitlessness, there is only this thing, which is not the same. And then I cannot place myself outside of it because there is no in and out. There is only consciousness. So where is this jiva in that sense? If the nature of limitless self is consciousness, existence, and limitlessness, then the individual self and the universal self can only be one, because there are no two limitlessness. Limitlessness means non-duality. That which is non-dual, one without a second, and there are no two selves, there are no three selves, there are no three consciousness, 4 or 5. There is only one consciousness. That's the nature of non-duality. If there are two existence, for example, two consciousness, which one of you, where I'm going to place myself? Oh, there are two selves. There is the self of Brahman, and there is, well, but, If Brahman and limitlessness means to say in the only reality, it's one without a second. So how can I be another self and another reality? Because if there are two realities, each one of those are going to impose a limitation to the other. You understand? Because here I end and there you, your other reality begins, okay? Which is an impossibility. In every speech we say one. There is only one self, one limitlessness, one existence. In every speech of ours we say one. One does this, one does that. We say also someone, no one. We never say some three, some two, huh? Because there is only one self. We always say herself, one, someone, no one, everyone. There is only everyone. Everyone is very interesting because puts everyone as one. Everyone, you know. So there is only one. There is only one of us, one self. That's the common ground in the beginning of this analysis here. If there are two freedoms, two limitlessness, neither will be free. Now we are looking at limitlessness as freedom. Why we need to understand this equation between freedom and limitlessness? Because freedom is only possible when we do no longer feel limited by what? By what I wish I could have, but I do not have. I wish I could be, but I am not, you know. So limitlessness and freedom are the same thing. If we feel limited, we are not free, okay? Because that feeling it's a vidya, you know. Oh, I feel limited, you know, and then I'm not free. And then what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna chase. I'm gonna really go all over the place, all over the world, trying to get or do, accomplish something to remove this nasty feeling of limitation. And what is limitation? Is there is something lacking, there is something missing, I should be something other than what I am, and so on. It's all part of a video, this misidentification with the body mind, which is by all means limited. You understand? So freedom is another name to limitlessness. We need to acknowledge our limitlessness so that we can experience independence and freedom. If there are two freedoms, neither freedom will be free because one will limit the other. When you are free, you do not evaluate the freedom. You enjoy it without any question. So we don't question when we feel really blissful and there is no sense of something is missing, you know. I'm free. I'm independent. I don't need anything to complete myself, to fulfill myself, to make me happy, because, you know, in that moment, I am free. I don't need to question or evaluate my freedom because there is nothing to compare to freedom, because freedom is of the nature of limitlessness, and limitlessness is of the nature of non-duality. Okay, non-duality. There is no other freedom that I could compare and evaluate my freedom. Freedom is the very nature, the very non-dual nature of our very self. Therefore, there is nothing to compare to it. At times, it may seem as thought there is an impersonal transcendental self that is different from the individual self, because during those rare times when the mind is completely still, limitlessness is experienced. So this is another very common misunderstanding in the spiritual world. We have these moments of pure sattva, let's say. The mind is so calm and still, and then it's totally free from any rajas and tamas. You know, it's really a beautiful mirror reflecting this conscious existence. And then in that moment, we experience our non-dual, limitless nature. And we just feel like, wow, static. And then the mind is still, and we have this experience. And then it feels like, okay, that is my real self. And this here, when my ego comes back and my minds, my vasanas, my likes and dislikes, when everything comes back again, I begin feeling limited. I lost my freedom. I lost my sense of non-duality, because my mind came back to be operated by this universal ignorance. So it seems at times that there is a transcendental self and there is the individual self, and those are two, and they are different, okay? Just because I have those moments in which my mind is somehow so pure, so static, that I had an experience of the reflection of the self on that mind, and I have the impression that only that is the self, as if the self is a byproduct of a sattvic mind. The self is never a byproduct of the sattvic mind, and this is something very important for us to understand. We need to cultivate and develop a sattvic mind. But the self is free and independent. If it was dependent on the reflecting apparatus, extremely sattvic, it would not be free. Okay? So the self is always free, and it's that by which the mind changes, The mind changes because of the self. Once Maya starts operating, the three energies, brings about the jiva, and keeps changing the mental condition of the jivas with different proportions of the three energies. So when we have this experience of this beautiful reflection, we say this is the higher self and this is the lower self, but this is just a misunderstanding. When the thought of I disturbs the experience, this beautiful experience, owing to some unconscious factors, the ego, the desires and fears, the sense of individuality returns, leading to the conclusion that this is my real self, the limited one, and that was Brahman, the unlimited self. But individuality is only a thought. How about that? Individuality is only a thought. All there is the self. The self is just shining the intellect of all jivas, and as it shines, it brings feelings and thoughts. And then there is this thought, because most everyone is born in ignorance and lives in ignorance. And what is ignorance? Is the individual thought. I, the body, I, my mind, my emotions, my feelings, and so on. This sense of individual being a separate, independent individual entity is ignorance. When this I returns, our bliss is over. But this individuality that we experience is just a thought. It's not a real factor. What is the real factor? The real factor is consciousness reflecting on a mind, producing an impersonal experience. Like all cockroaches, all insects, everyone is having an experience. But because they are not having a thought, I am a cockroach. So it does not have any problem, any sense of inadequacy or limitation, because it's an impersonal phenomenon. You understand? It's just consciousness reflecting on these three bodies, these jivas, producing experiences, So only the human jiva has this condition, this I thought, which is mistakenly identified with the body mind and mistakenly feels small, incomplete, and inadequate. And then it feels like, oh, this is the small self and that is the big self. No, the self does not change. What changes is what? The thought. What changes what? The thought. The thought has conditioned the self. Before I said, okay, wow, how amazing. And then I have an amazing experience as the self. And then through the same jiva, another thought comes. I say, oh, but I would like more, better, etc. Immediately these thoughts are going to disrupt that sense of limitlessness. So what has changed? Consciousness did not change. The self did not change. What changed was the thought, which was entertained in the intellect. So it gives us the indication of how important for us is to think in the lines of the scripture. You understand? To educate our intellect so that we can see the world and think like the scriptures suggest us to think. I am conscious existence of the nature of limitlessness. So when we think on those terms, I am infinite unconditional love. Immediately we experience, lack of limitation, expansion, and beauty, and peace, and love, and contentment. So the way we think is really key. Not that we want to produce different programs like positively programmed jivas. No. Vedanta is not a program to program the jiva to believe that he is limitless consciousness. Vedanta is a body of knowledge, teaching methodology that allows us to begin to see the world and think and analyze our experience and start developing this vision, this mind, this Upanishadic way of seeing the world and experience ourselves, to the extent that it comes a point that individual jiva, he realized or she realized that yes, indeed, I am a limitless consciousness. I'm not the body mind by which I become a jiva. You understand? I'm the Atma of the Jiva, I'm not the Jiva. Individuality is only a thought, not a fact. However, it is such a pervasive thought that consciousness under the spell of Maya feels to be limited, appearance feels to be limited. Furthermore, scripture is reliable. It is experience-based, it's not a philosophy. It is experience-based knowledge that is always available for confirmation, meaning to say anybody can go and follow the footsteps, suggested by Vedanta. It's all based on our experience, and provided, of course, we are qualified, everybody comes to the same end result. Okay, what is the end result? Yes, okay, now I got it. It was a misunderstanding, but it's a very, very hardwired misunderstanding. It's a piece of ignorance that is persistent. No, it is very, how you saying that? It's very pervasive. It's said before here. That is always for confirmation. It's based on revelations. It's based on revelations. What are revelations? An experience that happens to certain individuals, the so-called rishis, when the ego is totally suspended. Okay, when the ego is totally suspended, what happens? So this knowledge can be downloaded to the jiva, without being biased, without being interpreted, without being modified. Okay, this is what it means. Revealed knowledge is a knowledge that comes through, and the individual just feels like, wow, I did not produce this knowledge. It was revealed, okay, which is said to be different from channeling. Channeling is a different phenomenon. Channeling is someone who has a connection with certain energy and somehow believes to get some information that comes through one's mind, intellect, and then it is colored by one's vasanas and present to others. So these are revelations. So those are experience. But what is an experience? What is different between experience and knowledge? So the difference between experience and knowledge is that when we have an experience, we immediately come up with an understanding or knowledge about that experience. But more often than not, this knowledge is not really good knowledge, it's not really pure knowledge, because this knowledge is a byproduct of one's interpretation of that experience. And our interpretation is a byproduct of our vasanas, our conditioning, our biases. So this is not that kind of experience. This is a pure experience in which the ego, which is nothing but a load of vasanas, okay, files from previous experience, is totally suspended. And then this knowledge comes and it's a pure knowledge, unaffected, undistorted, unmodified by one's biases, one's vasanas, one's predispositions and tendencies and preconceptions, prejudices, and so on. Then there is something nice here. Over time, the non-essential aspects of this experience, this beautiful experience in those moments in which the ego is suspended, over time, the non-essential aspects of all these experience by these highly contemplated individuals, uh, interpretations by biased individuals have been discarded. So all those non-essential aspects, they are discarded by this beautiful tradition, leaving only the pure knowledge, okay? The knowledge of gravity, for example, happened at one moment in the mind of Galileo, but it is validated experientially every time we see a falling object or when we walk on the streets. However, in the absence of non-dual revelation, it means to say we do not need to become a rishi and go into a cave or go into the forest until we develop such a mind. We go into these states of samadhi, and then no, I don't care for the Upanishads, I don't care for Vedanta, I don't care for. I want to have the reals. I want to receive it again. I want to have my own revelation. So it's not necessary. Okay, you can develop so much sattva, you can develop a very contemplative mind, you can go in all kinds of samadhis, but yet you may never be able to interpret correctly such a revelation in a certain moment, you understand? Because the motivation may not be pure. It requires incredible state, incredible purity of mind and heart to be able to receive those revelations without distorting and changing them. So we don't need to become rishis all over again. In the absence of a non-dual revelation, corroborated knowledge gained by the experience of others is reliable. Vedanta is a word means of knowledge called apta vakya, the testimony of a competent, unbiased witness. So if we have an unbiased witness, testimony, aham brahmasmi, jiva atma, tattvamasi, the jiva atma is paramatma, and not only stating that, but presenting all the logic as we have in Vedanta, okay? And then we have everything which is required for us to realize the same truth. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to become a rishi or become a yogi. Most people who have non-dual experience do not benefit by this non-dual experience. It's something important to understand. A lot of people have had experience such as the one of Ramana Maharaj, but nobody actually extracts the pure knowledge in one of those near-death experiences. So what was the difference? The difference is that there was enough purity of mind and heart so that Ramana could extract easily the understand that I will not die. The body may die, but I won't die because I am the beginningless conscious existence, limitless by nature. Okay, so we don't need to think in the terms of getting a non-dual experience, because in most cases people do not really interpret those experiences correctly. As we know, a non-dual experience or any epiphany is only as good as our experience, our interpretation of the experience. And how are we going to interpret experience? We're going to interpret according to our program, our conditioning, our knowledge. But the problem is that a lot of the time our knowledge is not really good knowledge. It's some knowledge and some ignorance. And then we interpret in a way that does not free us. And we remain hooked, wanting to have more of the same experience, as if the experience of non-duality could validate my non-duality. No, non-duality is a fact. My nature as conscious existence, limitlessness is a fact. It is proved by Vedanta. It can be realized directly by the individual. And no experience will ever validate my nature, because the experience are just byproducts of Maya. And I am that before and beyond Maya, as we know. Vedanta is a word means of knowledge called apta vakya, the testimony of a competent, unbiased witness. Non-experience, meaning to say non-experiencing consciousness, the testimony, the non-experiencing witnessing principle, consciousness, awareness. One's knowledge is unbiased when the ego is suspended, because at that time one sees as consciousness sees. So how this business of self-knowledge takes place? In the old days, I used to say that it takes a moment of extreme sattva, condition. I used to say it takes a moment of intense predominance of sattva for us to see directly, immediately, firsthand, to see that, oh my God, now I got it. I am just conscious existence of the nature of limitlessness. There is a moment that you see it. In that moment, you see as consciousness, because in that moment, the ego of the seeker of moksha, the seeker of self-knowledge, somehow was suspended in a moment of purity or innocence, or lack of rajas and tamas, desires, or whatever, in that moment that one least expects. We could say it's a moment of purity of sattva guna, and then we see as consciousness, and then this self-knowledge becomes doubtless self-knowledge, because at that moment one sees as consciousness sees. So beautiful, huh? At that moment one sees as consciousness sees. Huh? Because consciousness is reality, one sees things as they are. We see things as they are, meaning to say, I see the non-dual nature of the self. That's the only reality we can see. You understand? We see things as they are. We should never misunderstand and think that then I will know everything that Ishvara knows. No. You understand? We'll see the true nature of reality as the limitless non-dual self. Where am I? Because consciousness is reality, one sees things as they are. One need not have a discrete non-dual experience to reap the fruit of non-duality, which is freedom from this sense of limitation, which is inherent to the belief I, the body-mind. Because non-duality is always experienced as the essence of the experiencing entity, It is always available to be known. So this limitless, non-dual self has been always experienced through everyone experience of the jiva, you know, as the essence of the jiva, of the experience knowing entity. You know, it's always there, always being experienced. It is always available to be known. It's always available to be known. I keep remembering that. I mean, every time I see these teachings, I remember those days, my early days as a spiritual seeker when I was living in the ashrams of Osho Rajneesh and sitting with Rajneesh. And I used to go into these states of sattva, you know, of contemplation, of bliss and peace and silence. And I would come out of the hall. You know, I think we used to call Buddha Hall. I used to come out of the Buddha Hall and walking, I would feel like almost levitating. You know, I was in such a state. I could feel like, oh my God, I mean, I'm not of this world. Nothing really affects me. Nothing's changing me, you know. I just want to be in this state, you know. So it's an experience of the self that's is so appealing because there is so much sattva and so little rajas and tamas that this reflection of the self, you know, it manifests as purity, as clarity, you know, as peace, as love, as beauty. And that is us experiencing the self. You understand? We experience all the time the self as this essence of the experiencing entity. And it's always available to be known. But assuming there is a proper mean. Why I'm saying that? Why I'm remembering that? Because around those days, around Osho, we did not have a proper teacher, proper means of knowledge. I used to go into those states. I used to feel, experience these things, you know, and there was no means of knowledge. There was no proper means of knowledge. So assuming there is a teacher and a proper means, a teaching methodology, you know, and then this knowledge, Aham Brahmasmi, is always available. Why? Because we experience the self all the time. That's why Vedanta does not say, oh yes, we're going to experience all your sattvic moments, your sattvic experience. No, we're going to analyze all your experience, you know, the very tamasic in deep sleep, the very rajasic when you are really all over the place, and the very tamasic, and the very sattvic when you are contemplating or having beautiful experience. Okay, so in every experience, the self is always being experienced as the essence of the experiencing entity. But we need a proper means of knowledge. We need a body of knowledge that helps us to understand, to put it to the test, and to get this knowledge. We need a proper means. And once known, and once this self is known, it cannot be lost or forgotten. That is the moment of direct, immediate self-knowledge, a paroksha jnana, direct and immediate, free of any doubt. Okay, in that moment, the knowledge, I am free, limitless consciousness is clear. And once you know it, it's not subject to forgetfulness. It never can be forget. You understand? It can be challenged here and there by some vasanas, and then you may find the big, oh, this is a little weird because I know that, you know, I cannot be affected by all of this. You know? So you can be challenged by vasanas, bits and pieces of ignorance, you know, fragments or rescues. How you say? Forget. I keep mixing up my Portuguese with English lately because I have been talking so much in Portuguese lately. So if I have some bits and pieces of ignorance challenging me here and there, some, you know, remainings of vasanas or something, it's okay. It may feel a little strange, but it does not affect our conviction, our clarity of self-knowledge. No, I am consciousness, and I claim my primary true identity as consciousness. And I have no problem with this little piece of ignorance because most of it already was cancelled by self-knowledge, and whatsoever remains surface, I don't give much energy, I don't give much attention, I don't feed it, I just deal with it, I handle it, I manage it, you understand? Without any sense of identity. Oh, this vasana is changing myself, it's challenged my self-knowledge. No, self-knowledge is clear, it's hard and fast. It cannot be forgotten, it cannot be lost. Why? Because it's the nature of the ever-present Jiva Atma, as the Atma of the Jiva. It's my very nature, it's in here, I understood that. It's my essence. Nothing happens without myself. Myself, I am all the time present. I'm the one conceding, propitiating this human experience, moment to moment. So I'm always ever present. This understanding is clear, and there is no experience, howsoever adverse it may be, that can cancel this clear view, this firm conviction of self-knowledge. That I am limitless consciousness. Because it's my nature, it's always present and it's available for what for me to verify if I want to get out. Am I changed here? No, I'm not changed. Okay, the mind may be changed and so on. So this knowledge is the doubtless self-knowledge. I was trying to move something here, but I'm without my other laptop. I have to go by the book. So how are we doing this time? We have some more time. So now we want to see how we get trapped in samsara, object happiness. This is a good way. We step back now and we want to see why and how we get trapped in samsara. The verse 11. If it's not clearly known that the self is limitless bliss, there will not be intense love for it. When it's known, there is no attraction for worldly objects because all one's love goes to the self. It's difficult to say that the self is either completely known or completely unknown. I love this verse. Isn't it beautiful? So if it's not clearly known that the self is limitless bliss, there will not be intense love for it. So as we have said before in the previous analysis, we all love our self-conscious existence. Okay, unconsciously we love, sometimes we don't love. When we mix up our self-existence with the body and with the mind, but generally speaking, everybody loves one's very existence, and one wants to live forever, and if one wants to put an end in one's life, is for the love of the self, because it's unacceptable to suffer, if my nature is happiness, is bliss, right? We want to put an end to that which is unnatural to us. So don't think that people who commit suicide is an exception. No, they do that for the sake of one's true nature is bliss, happiness. If it's not clearly known that the self is limitless bliss, there will not be intense love for it. So the whole process of Vedanta begins with developing an understanding of what I am really looking for. So I'm looking for what? I'm looking for happiness. I'm looking forward to put an end to the experience of suffering, of limitation, of smallness, inadequacy, discomfort, all these self-insulting feelings and emotions and thoughts. I want to put an end. I want to feel good. I want to feel free from all this ignorance. So we begin this search because we want to remove this ignorance / suffering element of our human experience. Okay, so For that, we come to the spiritual world after have tried everything in the material world, in samsara, and then we finally return to the spiritual world, and we hear that the only solution here is enlightenment. What is enlightenment? Oh, it's a big, beautiful experience. But then gradually we mature a little bit, and then we get to understand that the very, very source of our unhappiness is not a question of experience, but it's a question of identity. It's a question of mistaken identity. We have taken the body and the mind to be the self. So when we come to Vedanta, we hear those statements, that our problem is self-ignorance. We don't know who or what we are. Our problem is a problem of identity, of mistaken knowledge in respect to my true identity. So I need to correct my sense of identity. So, and then we hear that the self is the true nature, it's my true identity, okay? And if I get to know it clearly, if I have total clarity about my nature as consciousness, as the self, not the mind, not the body, and then I'm going to experience infinite and permanent eternal happiness, okay? And then everybody say, oh yes, that's it, that's my game. I'm fed up in trying to search for happiness in the world of objects. Now I heard that it is in the self, and I want to find this guy. I want to find Mr. Self, and I want to stay at his company forever because I want to enjoy this happiness that comes from Mr. or Mrs. Self, right? So unless it's clearly known that the self is the very source of the happiness that we look for, we search for lives and lives in the world, once and only when it's really clearly understood that the self is the only source of this happiness, only then we will have mumukshutva, which is an intense love, an intense desire to acknowledge, realize, my identity, my nature as the limitless conscious existence. Okay, so it needs a clear understanding, okay, that the self is limitless bliss. It's relatively easy for us to understand that the self is consciousness because we experience consciousness. And its existence, we have no problem with that because we appreciate our existence more than anything. And we know we exist. But unless we understand that the nature of the self is also limitlessness, bliss, okay? Unless we understand this third element, this third aspect, this third nature of the self, there will not be intense love for it because we love that which gives us bliss, that which gives us happiness. Okay, so it's very important that we understand that the nature of the self is limitless bliss so that we can develop a great intense value and love for it. When this self is known, but then there is something here. There is another turn into this verse. It says, when this self is known, what happened? There is no attraction for worldly objects because all one's love goes to the self. How about that? That is something that scares some people. Because they say, oh my God, if I really know that, if I develop this intense desire and love, for the self, and then maybe I'm gonna get depressed, Karen. I'm not gonna see joy in the world anymore, and I'm not gonna be all excited about accomplishing, gaining, and and getting things. No, you don't get depressed, okay? And you have no problems with paying your bills because your mind is getting smarter and wiser, and your actions are being more efficient, understand? But now you are beginning to turn your love, your desire, your attention to this inquiry. Okay, so this inquiry begins developing and remaining in the background as you are doing other things as well. We all the time you begin developing obsession to know your true identity as the self, because you are sure by now that if I find, if I'm clear, if I get this doubtless knowledge, self-knowledge, and then I have tapped into the very source of bliss and happiness, which is what all of us want. Okay, so we have this confidence because we understood the limitless nature of conscious existence as the self. But then there will be less and less attraction for the worldly objects. Okay, and my love is going more and more to the self. And then my beloved one says, "Oh my God, I mean, you are not crazy for me anymore, because you are in love with this Mr. or Mrs. Self now, you know." And I mean, I'm losing you. I mean, I'm being betrayed. Have you read that book that we find it in Shine World, which is what is the name? Tripura Rahasya. Have you read it? Read it? Tripura Rahasya. Ramji has taken it. They have published in Ramana Maharaj's ashram. Ramana loved that book, loved, and he did some satsangs, talks, short talks around that book, and they published there, and Ramji somehow added a little bit and made it a little short and published in Shine World. It's beautiful. It's a story about a woman, a beautiful princess that was somehow there walking on the bench of a river, and then came a beautiful prince, a powerful prince. And then he saw her and fell in love with her and say, "So I want to marry you." And she did not reveal to her who she was. Actually, she was not a princess. She was just a daughter of a wise man, and she was a very, very elevated spiritual being, very wise, very a great Mahatma, a true teacher, born as a teacher. And she was a kid, she was 20 or 18, totally beautiful physically, and she was incredible Mahatma. And this prince gets crazy with her, and then he says, "I'm gonna take you, and you're gonna be my wife." And then she said, "Okay, but let me talk to my father." And then the father, and the guy is not knowing that he's dealing with a sage and the daughter of a sage, which was a sage on her own, on her own caliber. And then he takes this woman, he gets married to this woman, and then he's so crazy, he's so in love with her, so in love with her. But slowly, he felt that there was something strange. She loves him, but not in that same way. And she was wise and wise. And then the whole book is slowly, she helps him to withdraw from this desire, from sensory pleasure, and developing desire for knowledge, to true love. And the book is a beauty to see all the stages of the process of this young prince growing and growing and growing, understand, and going through so much suffering, because he used to feel like, "Oh my God, she does not love me, she does not have passion for him." And she's teaching him this passion. She's teaching him true love. And all the time in the most polite way, like a great, great sage, Mahatma. So it's a beautiful book. It's a novel. It's amazing. I read this book on those days of Lucknow with Papaji, because it was in fashion, that book. Anyhow, it says here, when it's known, when the beauty of the self, when the nature of the self is true happiness and bliss is known, our attraction for worldly objects decrease, and one's love begins going more and more and more and more to the self. So this is something that it happens sometimes in families now. I mean, I have heard it different case of people, couple. One person has an intense desire for self-knowledge, And then the others sometimes feels a little bit insecure and and jealous, you know. So, and that is something we need to know how to handle and say, no, I mean, this is a different kind of love affair, you know. And the love I have for you is a human love. This is a love for God, a love for Brahman, a love to the self, a love for freedom, you know. So it can be explained. But it's a fact that there is less and less attraction for the world object because one love goes to it. It's difficult to say that the self is either completely known or completely unknown. It is very nice. It's difficult to say that the self is either completely known. You can say, no, 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 of course I know the self. Okay, what do you mean? No, I know. I am the self. I say myself, yourself, everybody is the self. So I know I am myself as well. And I understand, I exist, I understand consciousness. So I have a sense that I know what the self is. When we get into the spiritual world, we heard about the self as consciousness, what self is consciousness, and all there is consciousness. I say, oh yes, of course, it resonates, and I know I am conscious and I exist, and so on. So we have a sense that the self is known, but we also have a sense that is not completely known. No, because what? Because we say, I know the self, but yet I'm not experiencing bliss. I know the self, but I'm not yet experiencing bliss. So the self is partially known, but it is partially unknown because we mistake the self for the body mind. We experience the reflection of our conscious existence. But as a body mind, we do not experience the reflection of Ananta, translate as bliss, Ananda, experiential bliss. This experiential Ananda requires the understanding our nature as non-dual consciousness, non-dual existence. Limitlessness, Ananta, is non-duality. There is only consciousness, and I am that, and everything is that. So it's partially known, but it's not completely unknown. It's difficult to say that the self is either completely known or completely unknown. We cannot say I don't know, and we cannot say I know it completely because, you know, I've not really experienced this bliss that people talk about. Huh? And this goes for those that saying that Ramji often points out that you have one third enlightenment, two third enlightenment, but the full knowledge is not only the knowledge in regards to Nitya and Satya, but it's Satya in its entirety. You know, it's my nature is not only consciousness and existence, but it is non-duality, it's limitlessness. Okay, there is a lot to it. We could leave it for next week, and we could maybe exchange a few words here on a Q&A if anybody has a comment or question. Okay. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, my friends. Pleasure to be with you again, as always. So we meet again soon, Ishwara willing. Love you. See you soon.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Much love.
Thanks, Arlinda. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
You too.